Hello and welcome back to Tech and EduSpark Hub, where technology meets education. In today's lesson, we are still on the first principle method of differentiation, but we'll be looking at the first principle method of differentiation involving fractions or rational numbers. So before you watch this lesson, please hit the subscribe button, like this video, comment and share to more learners, and lastly, turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any lesson or any update from Tech and EduSpark Hub, and stick with me till the end and let's enjoy the best out of the lesson. So how does this first principle method involving fractions or rational number works? So let's say we have an example like y equals to 1 divided by x. We know that when we use the general method, so if we have something like y equals to 1 over x, using the general method, you can convert this to indices by having y equals to x raised to power 1 minus 1. Yes, x raised to power minus 1 is the same thing as what? 1 over x. So in this case, you can now use the general method as the y over the x to be equal to, so the power comes to the front, which is minus 1, and it will multiply the x raised to power minus 1 minus 1. So in this case, the y over the x will be equal to minus 1 multiplied by what? X raised to power minus 2. So in this case, you can have it as minus 1 multiplied by what? 1 divided by x squared. So this is still the same thing as what? X raised to power minus 2. So we can now have our dy over dx, which is our final answer, to be equal to minus 1 over what? X squared. Because minus 1 multiplied by 1 will give us what? Minus 1. And it will now be divided by what? The x squared. So let's solve this using the first principle method and see if we are going to get the same answer as the general method. So in this case, in solving using the first principle method, I said the first step to do is to what? Is to add change in y to y and add change in x to x. So in doing this, we have our y plus change in y to be equal to 1 divided by x plus change in x. So this is the first step to do. So the second step is to what? Is to carry y to the opposite side, because the goal is to have what? Change in y on the left hand side alone. So we have change in y to be equal to 1 minus x plus change in x. So when you carry y to the opposite side, this is plus, it will change to what? Minus. So we have minus y. But we know that y is equal to what? 1 divided by x. So we can now change y to 1 divided by x anywhere we see y. So we have our change in y to be equal to what? 1 divided by what? X plus change in x minus. So instead of writing minus y, we can just change it to what? 1 over x as given in the question. So we have 1 divided by x. So the next step here is to find the LCM. So we have change in y to be equal to, so we have 1 divided by, so let's find the LCM. Let me just find the LCM directly. So in this case, the LCM here is to multiply these two together. So we have x open bracket what? X plus change in x. So this is what you get when you multiply these two. So x multiplied by x plus change in x. We are going to have something of this type. So we are going to have x open bracket what? X plus change in x. So in finding the x here, we are going to divide this by everything here. So when you divide this x plus change in x by everything here, this will cancel everything in this bracket. So you are going to have this left. So this will be multiplied by the numerator. So we have x multiplied by 1 to be given as what? X. So we now have minus. So when you also divide x by everything here, x will cancel this x and it will be left with what you have in this bracket. So you'll be having x plus change in x left. And you now multiply it by what? The numerator. So you have open bracket x plus change in x. So the next thing to do, we have change in y to be equal to x. So this minus will multiply everything in this bracket. So minus multiplied by x will give us what? Minus x. And also minus multiplied by plus change in x will give us what? Minus change in x. So everything divided by what? X open bracket x plus change in x. You can see this is very simple. So in solving further, this x can cancel this change in x, because this is positive x and what? This is negative x. So positive x can cancel this negative x. So you are going to have change in y to be equal to what is left here. We have minus change in x left. So you have minus change in x divided by, so what is here? You have x plus what? Plus. So you have x open bracket, x plus change in x. So when you get this after solving, the next step to do is to what? Is to divide everything by change in x. So we have change in y divided by change in x to be equal to minus change in x divided by x open bracket x plus dx divided by what? Change in x over 1. So when you divide, you can change this to a multiplication sign by changing the rotation. So you have change in y divided by change in x to be given as what? Minus change in x divided by x open bracket x plus change in x close bracket. So when you change this division sign to multiplication sign, you are going to have multiply by 1 divided by what? Change in x. So when you have this can cancel this again. So you are going to have change in y divided by change in x to be equal to what? So you are going to have minus 1 divided by what? X open bracket x plus change in x. So you can expand this bracket. So you have change in y divided by change in x to be equal to minus 1 divided by, so x multiplied by x will give us what? X squared. And we have plus x dx. Because x multiplied by dx will give us what? X dx. So after expanding, you can see we are still having what? Change in x in our final answer. So in this case, we are going to limit change in x to 0. So in this case, our change in y divided by change in x will be given as minus 1 divided by x squared plus x open bracket 0. So our final answer will be given as dy over dx to be equal to what? So this will be given as minus 1 over, so x squared plus x multiplied by 0 will give us 0. So we have x squared. So you can see when we solve using the first principle method, we are still getting the same final answer as solving using the what? The general method. So this is how you solve question under the first principle method. So you can see it is very simple. You just have to put your mind and follow up with everything that is going on. So let's look at another example still on the first principle method involving rational numbers. And moving to the second example as written on the board, the question says y equals to 1 divided by 2x plus 1. So in solving this using the first principle method, the first step to do is to what? Is to add change in y to y and add change in x to x. So in doing that, we have y plus change in y to be equal to 1 divided by 2 open bracket x plus change in x, and we have plus 1. So this is what we are going to do. So the next step is to expand this bracket. So we have y plus change in y to be equal to 1 divided by what? So we have 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1. So this is the next thing to do. So the second step using the first principle method is to take y to the opposite side, because the goal is to have what? Just the y on the left hand side. So we have the y to be equal to, so this is also the same thing as change in y. So we have change in y equals to what? 1 divided by 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1 minus, so this y, because this is positive, so when it gets to the opposite sign of the equal sign, we are going to have negative y. So we know that, but y is equal to what? From the question, y is equal to 1 divided by what? 2x plus 1. So that means anywhere we see y, we can easily put 1 divided by 2x plus 1. So in doing that, we have change in y to be equal to 1 divided by what? 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1 minus, so instead of writing this minus y, we can just easily put this 1 divided by what? 2x plus 1. So now that we have done this, we can just easily find the LCM. So we can see change in y to be equal to, so the LCM is to multiply these two together. So in finding the LCM, we can just multiply these two together. So by putting them in the bracket, so we have 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1 in one bracket, and we also have 2x plus 1 in another bracket. So this is how you find the LCM. So in that case, if we divide these 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1 divided by everything in this denominator, this is going to cancel this and we'll be left with this. So we multiply this with the numerator. So we'll be having open bracket 2x plus 1 minus, also if we divide 2x plus 1 by everything in this denominator, it will cancel this 2x plus 1 and we'll be left with this. So we'll multiply this by the numerator. We are going to have what? Open bracket 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1 in a bracket. So now that we have done this, the next step is to expand this bracket up. So we are going to have change in y to be equal to, so we are going to have 2x plus 1. So this minus sign will multiply everything in this bracket. So minus multiplied by 2x will give us what? Minus 2x. So minus multiplied by 2 change in x will give us what? Minus 2 change in x. And also minus multiplied by minus plus 1 will give us what? Minus 1. So everything will be divided by what? Everything in this denominator, which is what? 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1, close bracket, open bracket, 2x plus 1, close bracket. So from what we see here, we can see that the like times we are having plus 1 and what? Minus 1. So this plus 1 can cancel this minus 1. Also, we are having plus 2x here and minus 2x here. So this can cancel this. So we are left with change in y equals to what? So we are left with what? We are left with what? Minus 2 change in x. So we have minus 2 change in x divided by what? Everything in the denominator, which is what? 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1, close bracket, open bracket, 2x plus 1. So this is what we are left with. So now that we have done this, the next step to do is to divide everything by what? Change in x. So we have change in y divided by change in x to be equal to minus 2 change in x over, open bracket, 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1, open bracket, 2x plus 1 divided by what? Change in x over 1. So this is the way you can write it so as not to confuse yourself. So we now have change in y over change in x to be given as what? Minus 2 change in x over, open bracket, 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1, open bracket, 2x plus 1. So we can now change this division sign to what? To multiplication sign. And when you change it to multiplication sign, this will change the position. So we have multiplied by 1 divided by what? Change in x. So this can cancel this and we'll be left with change in y divided by change in x to be equal to what? Minus 2 over what? Open bracket, 2x plus 2 change in x plus 1 and open bracket, 2x plus 1. So this is what we'll be left with. And in doing this, we cannot limit because we are still having change in s in our final answer. So you can see we are still having change in s. So we will now limit change in x to 0. So in doing this, we have change in y divided by change in x to be equal to minus 2 over, open bracket, 2x plus 2 open bracket 0, because we have limit what? The x to 0. So anywhere we see the x, we change it to 0. So we now have plus 1. And also we have open bracket 2x plus 1. So when we change this to 0, we are going to have something like change in y over change in x to be equal to minus 2 over, open bracket, 2x plus 1, because this will be equal to 0. 2 multiplied by 0 will give us 0. So we will now be left with 2x plus 1. So we have plus 1 and also open bracket, 2x plus 1. So we can see that what is in these two brackets is the same. So our final answer, let me just write that here. So our final answer, which is change in y over change in x, will be given as what? So we have minus 2 divided by, so these 2x plus 1 and 2x plus 1, you can see they are the same. So you can just write it in this way. We have 2x plus 1 square. And this will be given as our final answer to question of this type. So you can see how we solve it using the first principle method. You can see it is very simple. as always, you just have to put your mind and follow up with what is going on. So just add change in y to y and add change in x to x, solve everything that you can solve, and you can now know that y is equal to what you have in the question. Take y to the opposite side, find the LCM, and you will see the one that will cut each other, and from there you can divide everything by what? Change in x. And that is how you solve question of this type. So let's look at the last example on first principle method of differentiation involving what? Fractions or rational number. And moving to the last example on the first principle method of differentiation involving fraction, we have the question as written on the board, which is y equals to 1 divided by x squared. So in this kind of question, if we use the general method, so let's say we have y equals to 1 divided by x squared. Using the general method is the same thing as writing x raised to power minus 2. Because when you use the indices method, you change it and we have x raised to power minus 2. So in this case, our dy over the x will be equal to, so the power will come to the front, which is minus 2, multiplied by x raised to power minus 2 minus 1. So in this case, we are going to have minus 2 multiplied by what? X raised to power minus 3. So we can have minus 2 multiplied by, so this x raised to power minus 3, we can rewrite it as 1 over what? X cubed. So our final answer, which is the y over the x, will be given as what? Minus 2. So minus 2 multiplied by 1 will give us what? Minus 2 divided by what? X cubed. So let's solve this using the first principle method and see if we are going to get the same answer as the general method. So remember, the first thing using the first principle method is to add change in y to y and change in x to x. So solving that, we have y plus change in y equal to 1 over open bracket x plus change in x. So we now have our square because this x is carrying square. So we have y plus change in y to be equal to, so when you expand this, you can check our previous example. I've expanded something like this before. So we are going to have x squared plus 2x change in x plus change in x squared. So this is what you get when you expand it. You can check our previous example. I've done something of this type before. So if you don't know how to expand it, you can check. So in moving further, we can carry y to the opposite side because the goal is to have what? Change in y on the left hand side alone. So we have change in y to be equal to 1 divided by x squared plus 2x change in x plus change in x squared minus y. So this y is positive, and when it gets to the opposite side, it change to what? To minus. And we know that y equals to what? 1 over x squared. So anywhere we see y, we can easily put 1 over x squared. And in doing that, we have the y to be equal to 1 divided by x squared plus 2x change in x plus change in x squared minus, so instead of writing y, we are going to put what? 1 over x squared. So in this case, we can easily find the LCM. So we have our change in y to be equal to, so in finding the LCM, I said the LCM is as simple as multiplying both together. So we now have x squared open bracket. So we multiply these two together. So you have x multiplied by everything in this denominator. So you have x squared plus 2x change in x plus change in x squared. So this is what you get when you multiply both together. So this divided by everything in this denominator, this is going to cancel what? Everything in this bracket. So you'll be left with what? X squared. So x squared multiplied by this one will give us what? X squared. So we now have minus open bracket. So this x squared divided by everything here, it is going to cancel this x squared. So this x squared is going to cancel what is here, this x squared, and you'll be left with what? Everything in this bracket. So everything in this bracket multiplied by 1 will give us what? X squared plus 2x change in x plus change in x squared. So this is what you get when you find the LCM. So in solving further, we have change in y to be equal to, so we are going to expand this bracket by using the minus sign to multiply everything in this bracket. So you have x squared, so minus multiplied by x squared, you have minus x squared, and also minus multiplied by plus 2 change in x, you have what? Minus 2x change in x, and also minus multiplied by this plus change in x square, you have minus change in x square. So everything divided by what? Divided by x square open bracket x square. So let me just expand this once and for all. So in order to expand this, x square multiplied by x square will give us what? X raised to power 4. And also x square multiplied by what? This 2x change in x will give us what? Plus 2x cube change in x. Because we are having single x. So single x multiplied by x square will give us what? X cube. And also x square multiplied by this change in x square, we have what? Plus x square change in x square. So this is what you are going to have when you expand. So x square multiplied by change in x square will give us what? X square change in x square. So they are not the same. This is change in x square, this is x square. So they are not the same. It will just give you x square change in x square when you multiply them. So from what we see here, we can see that this is plus x square and this is minus x square. So this can cancel this. So we'll be left with change in y equal to what? Minus 2x change in x minus what? Change in x square, all divided by, so we have x raised to power 4 plus 2x cube change in x plus what? X square change in x square. So this is what we are going to be left with. So looking at what we have here, you can see we have change in x here and also change in x here. So you can easily factorize these two by bringing change in x out. So in doing that, we have change in y to be equal to, so we can bring minus change in x out, open bracket. So minus change in x in this 2x change in x. So we'll be left with what? 2x. So we'll have 2x. And also we'll have something like plus here. So we have plus. So change in s and change in x squared, we are going to have change in x left. So this is what you get, because let's say you multiply this, so you have minus change in x multiplied by 2x. You are going to get what? Minus 2x change in x, because this is positive. And also minus change in x multiplied by what? Plus change in x. You are going to get what? Minus change in x square. So this is what you get when you factorize. Minus times plus will give us minus. So this is how you factorize it. And we have divided by what? Divided by everything here, which is what? X raised to power 4 plus, we have 2x raised to power 3 change in x. And also we have what? Plus x square change in x square. So this is what you get when you factorize. So the next step is to divide everything by change in x. So we have change in y divided by change in x to be equal to what? So we have minus change in x, open bracket, 2x plus change in x all over x raised to power 4 plus 2x cube change in x plus x square change in x square. So everything here divided by what? Change in x over 1. So when you solve this further, you have change in y over change in x to be equal to, so this minus change in x, open bracket, 2x plus change in x all over x raised to power 4 plus 2x cube change in x plus x square change in x square. So you can change this division to multiplication and it will rotate this variable. So you have 1 divided by what? Change in x. So this, the x can cancel what? This change in x. So you'll be left with minus, which is also known as minus 1. So you have change in y over change in x to be equal to, so this minus multiplied by 2x will give us what? Minus 2x. And also minus multiplied by plus dx will give us what? Minus dx all over. So we'll be having x raised to power 4 plus 2x raised to power 3 change in x and also plus x square change in x square. So in solving further, you can see after solving, we are still having what? Change in x in our final answer. So we can now limit change in x to 0. So in doing this, we have our change in y over change in x to be given us. So anywhere we see change in x, we are going to change it to what? To 0. So we'll be having minus 2x minus 0 all over. So we'll be having x raised to power 4 plus 2x cube, open bracket. So this change in x will be turned to what? To 0. And we have plus x square, open bracket. So this change in x will also be changed to what? To 0. and we have square. So that is what this limit is telling us about. So limit change in s to 0 after solving, and you still have change in s in your final answer. So you are going to limit it to 0, and that means anywhere you see change in s, you put 0 as a substitution. So in this case, we'll be having our dy over dx to be equal to what? Minus 2x minus 0 will give us what? Minus 2x. And also, x raised to power 4. So this 2x cubed multiplied by 0 will give us 0. And also, this x squared multiplied by 0 will give us 0. So we'll be having x raised to power 4 only, because all this will give us 0 and this will give us 0. So 2x cubed multiplied by 0 will give you 0. X squared multiplied by 0 will also give us what? 0. So we'll be left with what? Minus 2x over 4. So this x can cancel what? This 4 to be given as 3. So we'll be having our dy over dx to be equal to minus 2 over x raised to power 3. So this is our final answer to question of this type. You can see when we solve using the general method, we get what? Minus 2 over x cubed. And when we solve using the first principle, we also get the same answer. And this is how you solve rational numbers using the first principle method. And this will be all on the first principle method involving irrational numbers or fractions. In our next lesson, we'll be looking at the next method of differentiation, which is known as the chain rule. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any lesson or any updates from Tech and EduSpark Hub. And lastly, don't forget to comment and share to more friends. And until next time, keep learning, keep coding, and I'll see you in the next one.